The explosion at Azure Bistro left Karoline and Daniel standing in stunned silence on the sidewalk. The roar of flames, the acrid smell of smoke, and the panicked shouts of people filled the air around them. It was as if time had slowed down, each second stretching longer than the last. Karoline's heart raced, her mind struggling to make sense of what she was witnessing. Just moments ago, they had been sitting inside that very building, sipping wine and planning their future together. Now it was nothing more than a fiery ruin. Daniel finally broke the silence. "We need to move back," he said, pulling Karoline gently by the arm. "It's not safe here." She nodded numbly, allowing him to guide her farther away from the chaos. As they stepped back, firefighters rushed past them, their heavy boots thudding against the pavement. Hoses were quickly unrolled and water began spraying into the inferno, but the blaze seemed unstoppable. Thick plumes of black smoke rose high into the night sky, visible for blocks around. The glow of the fire illuminated the faces of bystanders who had gathered to watch, their expressions a mix of horror and disbelief. Karoline couldn't tear her eyes away. Her thoughts raced. What had caused the explosion? Had anyone been hurt, or, worse? And why had Jordan Hayes thrown them out so abruptly, only minutes before disaster struck? She shook her head, trying to clear her mind. None of it made sense. Do you think someone could have known this was going to happen?" she asked hesitantly, glancing up at Daniel. He frowned, his brow furrowing. "I don't know. Maybe it was an accident, a gas leak or something like that, but no, I can't imagine anyone would have known." Karoline wasn't convinced. Something about the timing felt too strange. They had barely escaped the restaurant before the explosion occurred. If Jordan hadn't been so insistent about enforcing his dress code policy, they might still be inside. The thought sent a chill down her spine. As the initial shock began to wear off, reality started to sink in. People around them were talking, some speculating about what had happened while others shared fragments of information they'd overheard. A woman nearby mentioned hearing a loud pop just before the flames erupted. Another man claimed he saw sparks shooting out from the kitchen area moments earlier. Karoline listened intently, piecing together bits of the story. Eventually, police officers arrived to secure the scene. Yellow tape was strung up to cordon off the area, and curious onlookers were urged to step back. Reporters soon appeared, cameras flashing as they interviewed witnesses. One journalist approached Karoline and Daniel, microphone in hand. "Excuse me," the reporter said, smiling brightly despite the grim circumstances. "Were you inside the restaurant when the explosion happened?" "No," Karoline replied, shaking her head. "We were asked to leave just a few minutes before it happened." The reporter raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Asked to leave? Why?" Karoline hesitated, unsure how much to say. She glanced at Daniel, who gave her a slight nod, encouraging her to speak. "The manager said my husband wasn't dressed appropriately," she explained. "He kicked us out because of the restaurant's dress code." The reporter's eyes widened. "Wow, that's quite a coincidence. Do you think—" Before she could finish her question, a police officer interrupted, asking the journalist to step aside so emergency personnel could work without distractions. Karoline felt a wave of relief wash over her. She didn't want to talk about it anymore, not yet anyway. There were too many unanswered questions swirling in her mind. After the commotion died down a bit, Karoline and Daniel decided to head home. Neither of them felt like eating anymore, and the sight of the burning restaurant lingered in their thoughts. The walk back was quiet, both lost in their own reflections. When they finally reached their apartment, they collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. "I can't stop thinking about it," Karoline admitted after a long pause. "What if we hadn't been kicked out? We could have been trapped in there." Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "But we weren't. That's what matters. We're okay." She leaned into him, grateful for his calm presence. Still, the nagging feeling that something wasn't right refused to go away. "It's just weird, you know, the way Jordan acted. He was so angry, like it was some huge deal that you weren't wearing fancy shoes. And then boom, the place blows up right after we leave. Doesn't that seem suspicious to you?" Daniel shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe it's just bad luck. Accidents happen all the time. Karoline sighed. She wanted to believe him, but deep down, she couldn't shake the idea that there was more to the story. I don't know, she said softly. Something feels off. The next morning, news of the explosion dominated every channel and social media platform. Photos of the charred remains of Azure Bistro circulated widely, accompanied by headlines questioning whether negligence played a role in the tragedy. Initial reports suggested that a gas line in the kitchen might have ruptured, causing the explosion. Investigators were already on site combing through the wreckage for clues. Karoline scrolled through her phone, reading article after article. One report caught her attention. A quote from a former employee of Azure Bistro alleging that management had ignored warnings about faulty equipment in the past. According to the source, multiple staff members had raised concerns about the aging infrastructure of the building, including issues with the gas lines, but their complaints had gone unheeded. Her pulse quickened as she read the details. Could this mean Jordan Hayes had known about the potential danger and done nothing to address it? If true, it painted a very different picture of the manager who had been so adamant about enforcing his rules the previous evening. Determined to learn more, Karoline called her best friend, Rachel Monroe, hoping to get another perspective. Rachel was always plugged into local gossip and had a knack for uncover ASCII situations. After exchanging pleasantries, Karoline launched into her story, recounting everything that had happened, from their expulsion to the explosion and the disturbing allegations she'd just read online. Rachel listened intently, occasionally interjecting with questions or exclamations of disbelief. By the time Karoline finished, Rachel was practically bursting with curiosity. "This is insane," she exclaimed. "You guys literally walked out of there seconds before it blew up. That's crazy timing." "I know," Karoline said, her voice tinged with frustration. "And now I'm reading all these things about safety violations and ignored warnings. It makes me wonder if Jordan knew something was wrong and didn't care enough to fix it." Rachel paused thoughtfully. "If that's true, then yeah, it's beyond shady. But proving it won't be easy. You'll need evidence." Karoline nodded, even though Rachel couldn't see her. "I know. But I feel like I should at least try to figure out what really happened. I can't just ignore it." Rachel agreed, offering her support. "Let me know if you need help. Maybe I can dig up some dirt on this guy. People love to gossip, especially about stuff like this." Encouraged by Rachel's enthusiasm, Karoline resolved to take action. Later that day, she visited a local news station, hoping to speak with someone who might be able to shed light on the situation. After waiting patiently for nearly an hour, she was introduced to Ethan Carter, a seasoned investigative journalist known for his sharp instincts and relentless pursuit of the truth. Ethan greeted her warmly, inviting her to sit down in a small conference room. His demeanor was professional yet approachable, putting Karoline at ease. Over the course of their conversation, she recounted her experience at Azure Bistro, sharing every detail she could remember. Ethan listened attentively, jotting notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When she mentioned the allegations about ignored safety warnings, Ethan's expression turned serious. "That's interesting," he said. "If those claims are accurate, it could point to gross negligence on the part of management. But we'll need proof, documents, emails, anything concrete, to back it up." Karoline nodded. "I understand. I just thought maybe you'd want to look into it. It feels like there's more to this story than meets the eye." Ethan smiled faintly. "You're probably right. And honestly, your account adds a unique angle to the investigation. Let me see what I can find. If there's anything worth pursuing, I'll let you know." With that promise, Karoline left the news station feeling cautiously optimistic. For Rue, the first time since the explosion, she had a sense of purpose, a drive to uncover the truth behind the tragedy that had almost claimed their lives. Little did she know, her journey was only beginning. The evening air in downtown Chicago was crisp, carrying the faint scent of roasted coffee and freshly baked bread. Streetlights flickered to life as dusk settled over the city, casting warm golden glows onto sidewalks bustling with people. Among Them were Karoline Leavitt and her husband Daniel, who strolled hand in hand toward Azure Bistro, one of the most talked about restaurants in the area. Karoline adjusted the strap of her purse nervously. She hadn't been out for dinner like this in months. Between work deadlines, house repairs, and just the general chaos of daily life, finding time for something special had become nearly impossible. But tonight was different. It wasn't just any night. It was their 5th wedding anniversary. They had planned this evening carefully, choosing a place that felt fancy enough to celebrate such an important milestone, but not so extravagant that it would make them uncomfortable. Azure Bistro seemed perfect. Daniel smiled at her as they approached the entrance. He wore his usual casual style, jeans, a button-up shirt left untucked, and sneakers. His dark hair was slightly messy from the wind outside, but he didn't seem to care. To him, dressing up meant swapping his hoodie for something with buttons. Karoline, on the other hand, had spent hours getting ready. Her auburn hair was styled into soft waves, and she wore a simple black dress that hugged her figure elegantly. She looked stunning, and Daniel told her so more than once during their walk. As they stepped inside Azure Bistro, the contrast between the noisy streets and the serene interior struck them immediately. The restaurant was dimly lit, with candles glowing softly on each table. Soft jazz music played in the background, creating an atmosphere both intimate and sophisticated. A hostess greeted them warmly and led them to a cozy corner seat near the window. From there, they could see the city lights twinkling beyond the glass. "This is nice," Daniel said, leaning back in his chair as he scanned the menu. "I think I'll get the steak." Karoline laughed lightly. "Of course you will, you always order steak." "What can I say? It's classic." He grinned before turning serious for a moment. "Seriously though, thanks for planning all this. I know we don't do stuff like this often, but it means a lot." She reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "Me too. Let's just enjoy it, okay?" Their server arrived shortly after, a young man named Alex, whose polite demeanor put them at ease. He took their drink orders and promised to return with menus soon. As he walked away, Karoline glanced around the room, taking in the other patrons. Most were dressed impeccably, some even wearing suits or designer dresses. Compared to them, Daniel's outfit stood out, not necessarily in a good way. "Do you think maybe we should have dressed up more?" she asked quietly, suddenly feeling self-conscious. Daniel shrugged. "Nah, we're fine. Besides, nobody's paying attention to us." But someone was paying attention. At the far end of the dining area stood Jordan Hayes, the restaurant's manager. Tall and impeccably groomed, Jordan prided himself on running Azure Bistro with precision and flair. Every detail mattered to him, from the arrangement of flowers on the tables to the way servers addressed customers. And while he believed strongly in inclusivity and fairness, he also expected everyone to adhere to the rules of his establishment, including its strict dress code policy. Jordan's eyes narrowed as he observed Daniel's sneakers and untucked shirt. In his mind, these small infractions represented a lack of respect for the effort he and his staff put into making Azure Bistro a premier destination. Frowning, he made his way over to their table, determined to address the issue personally. "Good evening," Jordan began, his tone clipped but polite. "I hope everything is to your liking so far." Karoline looked up, startled by his sudden appearance. "Oh yes, thank you. Everything's lovely." "That's good to hear," Jordan replied, though his expression remained stern. "However, I must point out that our dress code requires gentlemen to wear proper attire. Closed-toe shoes and tucked-in shirts specifically." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "Really? No one mentioned that when we booked the reservation." "It's clearly stated on our website," Jordan countered smoothly. "Unfortunately, since you're not in compliance, I'll need to ask you to leave." Karoline's jaw dropped. "Wait, what? We're already here. Can't we just stay? We didn't mean to break any rules." "I'm sorry, but I have to enforce the policy consistently," Jordan said, his voice firm. "If I let one person bend the rules, others will expect the same treatment." Daniel sighed, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "Look, we came here to celebrate our anniversary. Isn't there anything you can do? Maybe give us a warning or something?" Jordan shook his head. I'm afraid not. My decision is final. For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Karoline clenched her fists under the table, anger simmering inside her. This wasn't how their evening was supposed to go. Finally, she spoke, her voice tight with restraint. Fine, we'll leave, but this isn't right. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and stood up, Daniel following close behind. As they exited the restaurant, the stares of other diners burned into their backs. Once outside, Karoline exhaled sharply, trying to calm herself. That guy was ridiculous, she muttered, pacing along the sidewalk. Who does he think he is? He's just doing his job, Daniel said, though his tone suggested he didn't entirely agree. Let's just forget about it and grab food somewhere else. Karoline nodded reluctantly, still seething. But, as they turned to walk away, a loud boom echoed through the street. Both froze mid-step, hearts pounding as they spun around to see flames erupting from Azure Bistro. Smoke billowed into the night sky, and screams erupted from inside the building. Chaos unfolded rapidly as panicked patrons fled the scene, some coughing and others crying for help. Fire trucks arrived within minutes, sirens wailing, but the damage was already done. The once elegant restaurant was now engulfed in fire, reduced to little more than a blazing shell. Stunned, Karoline and Daniel watched from a safe distance, unable to process what they were seeing. What just happened? Karoline whispered, clutching Daniel's arm tightly. I don't know, he replied, his voice trembling. But we were just in there. The realization hit them like a punch to the gut. If Jordan hadn't kicked them out, they might have been trapped inside when the explosion occurred. For several long moments they stood frozen, staring at the inferno that had consumed the place where they'd planned to celebrate their love. It was a sobering reminder of how quickly things could change and how lucky they were to be standing there at all. Over the next few days, Karoline found herself consumed by thoughts of Azure Bistro and the explosion that had nearly changed her life forever. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, a deeper truth hidden beneath the surface. Every time she saw a news update or scrolled through social media, she felt a pull to dig deeper, to uncover what really happened. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a sense of responsibility. Ethan Carter, the journalist she'd spoken with at the news station, reached out to her a couple of days later. He sounded excited when he called, his voice brimming with energy. Karoline, he began, I've been looking into those allegations you mentioned about safety issues at Azure Bistro. I think we might be onto something. Her heart skipped a beat. What did you find? Well, it's early days yet, Ethan explained, but I managed to track down some former employees willing to talk. One of them claims they repeatedly warned management about problems with the gas lines in the kitchen. They even sent emails documenting their concerns. If these emails exist, and if we can get our hands on them, it could be huge. Karoline's mind raced. Emails were solid evidence. If they could prove that Jordan Hayes, the manager who had kicked her and Daniel out, had ignored warnings about the restaurant's safety, it would expose him for what he truly was, reckless and irresponsible. That's incredible, she said. How do we get them? That's where things get tricky, Ethan admitted. These kinds of documents are usually kept private unless someone leaks them, but I'm working on it. In the meantime, I need your help. Can you tell me anything else about your interaction with Jordan? Any specific details you remember might jog someone's memory or lead us to another source. Karoline thought back to that night, replaying the scene in her mind. He seemed really angry, she recalled. Not just annoyed, like genuinely furious. Like we had personally offended him somehow, and he didn't give us any chance to explain ourselves. It was almost like he wanted us gone. Ethan scribbled notes furiously. Interesting, that could mean something, or it could just be his personality. Still, it's worth noting. Let's keep digging. The two agreed to stay in touch, exchanging updates as new information came to light. Meanwhile, Karoline decided to take matters into her own hands. She started reaching out to people who had worked at Azure Bistro, using social media and online forums to track down former employees. At first, most of them were hesitant to talk, either because they feared retaliation or simply didn't want to get involved. But eventually one name caught her attention: Mia Thompson. Mia had been a server at Azure Bistro until just a few months ago. Her profile picture showed a young woman with curly brown hair and a warm smile. Karoline sent her a direct message, introducing herself and explaining why she was reaching out. To her surprise, Mia responded almost immediately. "Hi, Karoline," Mia wrote. "I saw your message, and yeah, I'll talk to you. What happened at the restaurant is awful, and honestly, it doesn't shock me. Management always cared more about appearances than safety." Encouraged by Mia's willingness to share, Karoline arranged to meet her at a quiet cafe near downtown Chicago. When Mia arrived, she looked nervous but determined. She ordered a coffee and sat down across from Karoline, fidgeting with her cup. "So tell me about the gas lines," Karoline prompted gently. "What exactly happened?" Mia sighed, glancing around as if to make sure no one was listening. "It started months ago. Some of the staff noticed weird smells coming from the kitchen, like gas but faint. We reported it to Jordan, but he brushed it off, saying it was probably nothing. Then a few weeks later, the smell got stronger. A maintenance guy came in and confirmed there was a leak, but instead of shutting everything down, Jordan told him to patch it up and move on. He didn't want to lose business by closing the restaurant for repairs." Karoline's stomach churned. "Did anyone try to push back? Or report it higher up?" Mia shook her head. "Some of us complained, but Jordan made it clear he wasn't going to budge. He threatened to fire anyone who caused trouble. So we kept quiet. But trust me, everyone knew it was only a matter of time before something bad happened." Karoline thanked Mia for sharing her story, promising to keep her identity confidential. As she left the cafe, her mind buzzed with possibilities. If Mia's account was true and if Ethan could verify it, they might finally have the evidence needed to hold Jordan accountable. Back home, Karoline filled Daniel in on her progress. He listened quietly, occasionally nodding or asking questions. When she finished, he gave her a small smile. "You're amazing, you know that? Most people would have walked away after something like this, but here you are, fighting for answers." She shrugged modestly. "It's not just about us. People could have died that night. Someone has to make sure this never happens again." A few days later, Ethan called again, this time sounding even more excited. "Karoline, I think I've hit pay dirt," he said. "I got my hands on internal emails between Jordan and the maintenance team. They confirm everything Mia told you, and then some. There are memos from months ago warning about structural issues in the building, including the gas lines. Jordan dismissed every single one of them, calling them exaggerated and unnecessary expenses." Karoline's breath caught in her throat. "That's it," she whispered. "That's what we need." "Exactly," Ethan replied. "But here's the thing. This kind of evidence isn't easy to come by, and once we go public with it, there's no turning back. Are you ready for that?" She hesitated for only a moment before answering, "Yes, absolutely." With the emails in hand, Ethan began drafting a series of articles exposing the truth about Azure Bistro. The first piece focused on the explosion, itself detailing the timeline of events and highlighting survivor testimonies. The second delved into the allegations of negligence, quoting anonymous sources and referencing the damning emails. By the time the third article was published, the story had exploded onto the national stage. Public outrage grew rapidly as more people learned about the restaurant's dangerous conditions and Jordan's refusal to address them. Customers who had dined at Azure Bistro expressed anger and disbelief, while industry experts condemned the blatant disregard for safety protocols. Even local politicians weighed in, calling for stricter regulations and accountability measures. Amid the chaos, Jordan Hayes became the center of attention. Reporters hounded him for comments, and social media users vilified him relentlessly. For a while, he tried to defend himself, claiming he had acted in good faith and blaming the tragedy on unforeseen circumstances. But as the evidence mounted, his excuses fell apart. Finally, under immense pressure, Jordan resigned from his position as manager of Azure Bistro. In a brief statement released to the press, he apologized for the missteps that led to the disaster but stopped short of taking full responsibility. His resignation did little to quell the backlash, however. The company that owned Azure Bistro launched an internal investigation, vowing to implement sweeping changes to prevent similar incidents in the future. Through it all, Karoline stayed in close contact with Ethan, providing input and support whenever needed. Together, they ensured the story remained front and center in the public eye. Though it was exhausting work, Karoline felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing they were making a difference. One evening, as she and Daniel sat on the couch watching the news, a segment aired about the ongoing fallout from the Azure Bistro explosion. The reporter highlighted Karoline's role in bringing the truth to light, praising her courage and determination. Daniel turned to her with pride in his eyes. "You know," he said, "you've inspired a lot of people with this. Not just me. You've inspired everyone who cares about fairness and justice." Karoline smiled softly, feeling a mix of emotions. Pride, yes, but also relief. For weeks, she had carried the weight of the tragedy on her shoulders, driven by a need to uncover the truth. Now, finally, that burden was beginning to lift. "It's not over yet," she said quietly, "but maybe we've helped stop something like this from happening again." Daniel nodded, pulling her closer. "And that's enough for now." As they sat together in silence, watching the city lights flicker outside their window, Karoline allowed herself a moment of peace. The road ahead would still be challenging, but for the first time in a long while she felt hopeful. Hopeful that change was possible, and that she had played a part in making it happen. The weeks following the publication of Ethan Carter's investigative articles were a whirlwind for Karoline. What had started as a personal quest to understand the events at Azure Bistro had turned into something much larger. A movement for accountability and safety in businesses across the city. The public outcry over Jordan Hayes' negligence sparked conversations about corporate responsibility, leading to protests outside other establishments owned by the same parent company. People demanded transparency and change, and Karoline found herself at the center of it all. Despite the chaos, she remained focused. Every day brought new developments, interview requests, messages from supporters, and updates from Ethan as he continued to dig deeper into the story. Karoline was grateful for his partnership. Without him, she doubted she would have been able to navigate the overwhelming attention. Together, they worked tirelessly to ensure that the truth stayed in the spotlight. One morning, Karoline received an email from Ethan with a subject line that made her heart race. "We need to talk." She opened it immediately, scanning the brief message inside. "Meet me at the station," it read. "I've got something big." Curiosity and a little apprehension gnawed at her as she prepared to leave the house. Daniel noticed her unease and offered words of encouragement. "Whatever it is, you'll handle it," he said, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "You've already done so much." Karoline nodded, drawing strength from his confidence in her. She grabbed her coat and headed downtown to meet Ethan at the news station. When she arrived, Ethan greeted her with a mix of excitement and seriousness. He led her to a quiet corner of the office, away from prying ears, and pulled out a folder filled with documents. "This just came in," he explained, spreading the papers across the table. "It's more evidence, emails, memos, even internal audits from the parent company. They knew about the problems at Azure Bistro long before the explosion. Not just Jordan, but higher-ups too." Karoline's eyes widened as she flipped through the pages. The documents painted a damning picture of systemic negligence. Executives had repeatedly ignored warnings from inspectors and employees alike, prioritizing profits over safety. In one particularly chilling memo, a senior manager dismissed concerns about the gas lines, writing, "These minor issues are not worth the cost of repairs. Let's focus on customer satisfaction instead." Her hands trembled as she set the papers down. This changes everything," she whispered. "If people see this, they'll know how widespread the problem is." Ethan nodded grimly. "Exactly. But releasing this information isn't going to be easy. The parent company, Has lawyers who will fight back hard. Are you ready for that? Karoline hesitated only briefly before answering. Yes. We can't let them get away with this. Too many lives are at stake. With Ethan's guidance, they crafted a plan to release the documents strategically. They decided to break the story into parts, starting with the most shocking revelations and building momentum over time. Each article would expose a different layer of corruption within the company, holding individuals accountable while also pushing for broader reforms. The first piece dropped 2 days later, sending shockwaves through the community. Headlines blared, accusations of corporate greed and endangerment, accompanied by excerpts from the leaked documents. Social media erupted with outrage as people shared the story far and wide. Calls for justice grew louder, and local officials announced plans to investigate not only Azure Bistro, but every property owned by the parent company. As the pressure mounted, executives scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Some resigned abruptly, while others issued carefully worded apologies designed to deflect blame. Lawyers swarmed the scene, threatening legal action against anyone involved in leaking the documents. But Karoline and Ethan stood firm, refusing to back down. Their resolve inspired others to come forward. Former employees of the parent company began sharing their own stories of unsafe working conditions and ignored complaints. Customers recounted close calls and near misses at various locations. Each testimony added fuel to the fire, turning what had begun as a single tragedy into a full-blown reckoning. Through it all, Karoline became a symbol of courage and determination. Strangers approached her in grocery stores and coffee shops, thanking her for speaking up. Reporters sought her out for interviews, eager to capture her perspective on the unfolding drama. At first, the attention overwhelmed her, but she quickly learned to embrace it as part of the process. If telling her story could help prevent another disaster, she was willing to endure whatever came her way. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings and interviews, Karoline returned home to find Daniel waiting for her with dinner on the table. His expression softened when he saw how exhausted she looked. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently. She sighed, sinking into a chair. "I don't know. It's exhausting, but I feel like we're actually making progress. People are listening, and things might finally start to change." Daniel smiled, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "That's because of you. You didn't give up, even when it would have been easier to walk away." Karoline shook her head. "Not just me. It's everyone. The reporters, the whistleblowers, the people sharing the story online. This isn't just my fight anymore. It belongs to all of us." As the days turned into weeks, the campaign gained even more traction. Advocacy groups joined forces with Karoline and Ethan, organizing rallies and petitions demanding stricter safety regulations. Politicians introduced legislation aimed at increasing oversight of commercial properties, citing the Azure Bistro tragedy as a wake-up call. Slowly but surely, the tide began to shift. Amid the victories, however, there were challenges. Legal threats loomed large, and Karoline often found herself lying awake at night worrying about potential repercussions. Would the company retaliate? Could they silence her efforts? These fears gnawed at her, but she refused to let them paralyze her. Instead, she leaned on the support of those around her: Daniel, Ethan, Rachel, and countless others who believed in the cause. Finally, after months of relentless advocacy, the parent company announced sweeping reforms. They pledged millions of dollars toward upgrading infrastructure, hired independent inspectors to assess their properties, and implemented new policies to prioritize employee and customer safety. While some skeptics doubted the sincerity of these promises, Karoline chose to view them as a step in the right direction. To celebrate the milestone, Ethan invited Karoline to join him for a special broadcast commemorating the end of their investigation. As cameras rolled, he turned to her with genuine admiration in his eyes. "None of this would have been possible without Karoline Leavitt," he said, addressing the audience. Her bravery and determination reminded us all that ordinary people can make extraordinary changes. Karoline felt tears prick her eyes as applause erupted in the studio. She hadn't expected such recognition, nor did she feel entirely comfortable accepting it. Still, she managed a small smile, knowing that the real reward lay in the impact they'd made. After the broadcast ended, Ethan pulled her aside for a private moment. "You've done incredible work," he said sincerely. "But remember, this isn't the end. There's still so much more to do." Karoline nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "I know, and I'm ready." On the drive home, she reflected on everything that had happened since that fateful night at Azure Bistro. From being kicked out of a restaurant to becoming a voice for change, her journey had been anything but ordinary. Yet despite the hardships, she felt proud of what she had accomplished. Not for herself, but for everyone who deserved safer spaces and fairer treatment. As she stepped through the door of her apartment, Daniel greeted her with a warm hug. "How does it feel?" he asked softly. Karoline paused, considering the question. Then, with a quiet smile, she replied, "It feels like a beginning." Months passed and life began to settle into a new rhythm for Karoline and Daniel. The explosion at Azure Bistro had shaken them deeply, but the journey that followed had transformed their lives in ways they never could have imagined. What started as a personal ordeal turned into a movement, a push for accountability, safety, and justice. For Karoline, it became more than just a cause. It was a mission, one she felt compelled to carry forward. The changes brought about by their efforts were undeniable. The parent company of Azure Bistro implemented sweeping reforms, investing heavily in upgrading infrastructure across its properties. Independent inspectors were hired to conduct regular checks, ensuring compliance with safety standards. Politicians introduced legislation aimed at improving oversight of commercial buildings, inspired by the tragedy and the public outcry it sparked. Slowly but surely, the city began to shift toward a culture of responsibility and transparency. But for Karoline, the work wasn't done. She realized that while progress had been made, there was still so much more to do. Unsafe conditions weren't unique to one restaurant or one company. They were a systemic issue affecting countless businesses and communities. Determined to keep pushing for change, she decided to channel her energy into advocacy work. With Ethan's encouragement, Karoline partnered with several consumer rights organizations dedicated to holding businesses accountable. Together, they launched campaigns to raise awareness about workplace safety, building codes, and the importance of listening to employees' concerns. Karoline traveled around the city, speaking at community events, schools, and town halls. Her story resonated with people from all walks of life, inspiring others to speak up when they saw something wrong. One evening, after returning from a particularly moving speech at a local high school, Karoline sat down with Daniel to reflect on how far they'd come. "Do you remember that night?" she asked softly, gazing out the window at the twinkling city lights. "The night we walked away from Azure Bistro?" Daniel nodded, smiling faintly. "How could I forget? It feels like another lifetime now." "It does," Karoline agreed. "Back then, I thought everything was falling apart, but maybe it was exactly what needed to happen. If we hadn't gone through all of this, none of these changes would have happened. People wouldn't be talking about safety the way they are now." Daniel reached over to take her hand. "You've done something amazing, Karoline. You've given a voice to people who didn't think anyone would listen." She smiled, though her eyes welled up with emotion. "It's not just me. It's everyone. The whistleblowers, the reporters, the advocates. We're all part of this, together." Their conversation drifted into silence as they sat side by side watching the world outside. The city felt different now. Not perfect, but better. Safer. And Karoline knew she had played a role in making it that way. A few weeks later, Karoline received an invitation to attend a ceremony honoring individuals who had contributed to improving public safety in Chicago. She hesitated at first, unsure if she wanted to step back into the spotlight. But Rachel encouraged her to go, reminding her that accepting recognition wasn't about vanity. It was about acknowledging the power of collective action. On the day of the event, Karoline dressed carefully, choosing a simple yet elegant outfit. that reflected her personality. As she walked into the grand hall where the ceremony was being held, she was greeted by applause. Faces she recognized from interviews and rallies smiled warmly at her, and strangers approached her to express gratitude for her efforts. It was humbling, overwhelming, and deeply rewarding all at once. During the ceremony, a representative from the mayor's office took the stage to present awards to those who had made significant contributions. When Karoline's name was called, she stood up nervously, her heart pounding as she walked to the podium. The room fell silent, waiting for her to speak. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I didn't expect to be here today. Honestly, I didn't expect any of this to happen. All I wanted was answers, to understand why my husband and I were lucky enough to walk away from a disaster that could have taken our lives." Her words drew murmurs of agreement from the audience. Taking a deep breath, she continued, "What I learned along the way is that change doesn't come from one person alone. It comes from communities standing together, refusing to accept things as they are because we know they can be better. This award isn't mine. It belongs to everyone who spoke up, who shared their stories, who demanded justice." As she stepped away from the podium, the crowd erupted into applause. Ethan, sitting nearby, gave her a thumbs up, his expression filled with pride. Karoline returned to her seat, feeling a mix of emotions, gratitude, relief, and a renewed sense of purpose. After the ceremony, guests mingled and celebrated the achievements of the evening. Karoline found herself surrounded by well-wishers, each eager to shake her hand or share their own experiences. Among them was Mia Thompson, the former server from Azure Bistro who had first spoken out about the gas line issues. Seeing her face, Karoline felt a surge of warmth. "Mia," she said, pulling the younger woman aside, "I can't thank you enough for coming forward. Your courage meant everything." Mia smiled shyly. "No, thank you. Without you, none of this would have happened. You gave us a platform to be heard." They hugged briefly before parting ways, both aware of the bond they now shared, a connection forged through adversity and triumph. In the months that followed, Karoline continued her advocacy work, expanding her reach beyond Chicago to other cities facing similar challenges. She collaborated with lawmakers, business owners, and community leaders to develop policies that prioritized safety and fairness. Her partnership with Ethan remained strong, their friendship evolving into a professional alliance built on mutual respect and shared goals. At home, life returned to a quieter pace. Karoline and Daniel cherished their evenings together, finding comfort in the little things: shared meals, long conversations, and quiet moments spent watching the sunset. Though the scars of their experience lingered, they served as reminders of how far they'd come and how much they had to be grateful for. One crisp autumn afternoon, Karoline and Daniel visited the site of the former Azure Bistro. The charred remains of the building had been cleared away, leaving behind an empty lot awaiting redevelopment. Standing at the edge of the property, they looked out over the space where their lives had changed forever. "I never thought I'd come back here," Karoline admitted, her voice soft. "It brings back so many memories, some good, some bad." Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "We survived it. That's what matters." She nodded, leaning into him. "And we made a difference. That's something I'll always be proud of." As they stood there, the wind rustling through nearby trees, Karoline felt a profound sense of peace. The past couldn't be erased, but it had shaped them in ways that made them stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. They had faced fear, anger, and uncertainty, and emerged on the other side with hope and resilience. Walking away from the lot, hand in hand, they left behind the remnants of tragedy and embraced the promise of the future. For Karoline and Daniel, it was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light could shine through, and that sometimes the hardest journeys lead to the most meaningful destinations.